People often notice it first in others: the sudden defensiveness, the emotional overreactions, the refusal to repair harm. It appears as immaturity, impulsive anger, childish withdrawal, something easy to label and quietly dismiss from a distance. Yet the longer it stays visible, the more familiar the pattern feels, closer than expected, uncomfortably recognizable. Moments arrive when reactions outpace intention, when silence replaces repair, when blame feels safer than reflection. The damage seems accidental, almost innocent, yet consequences spread outward without anyone taking responsibility. What looks small on the surface is guarding something older, something learned, something still operating unseen. Emotionally immature behavior is commonly mistaken for a lack of intelligence, empathy, or moral development. Yet psychology reveals something more adaptive beneath its surface presentation. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the psyche hides its most fragile material behind exaggerated defenses, often mistaken for character flaws rather than protective mechanisms. In everyday language, immaturity sounds like an insult, but within survival psychology, it functions more like an emergency response activated long before conscious choice. A brief scene unfolds at a dinner table. A casual comment triggers sudden hostility. Conversation collapses. Everyone adjusts quietly to keep the peace. The reaction seems disproportionate, yet the speed suggests an old alarm, not a considered decision, something rehearsed through repetition rather than reason. Behavioral scientists note that repeated emotional responses become automatic when they once prevented pain, rejection, or loss during earlier developmental stages. Another moment appears at work. Feedback is offered neutrally, shoulders tense, defensiveness rises, accountability dissolves into justification and subtle blame shifting. From the outside, it reads as stubbornness, but internally it mirrors threat detection, the nervous system preparing to protect a vulnerable self-image. Evolutionary psychologists suggest survival favored rapid emotional reactions long before complex social repair, especially in unpredictable or hostile environments. What survives long enough often becomes normalized, even when the original danger no longer exists, leaving outdated strategies running quietly in the background. A partner withdraws mid-conversation, eyes distant, phone appears, silence replaces dialogue, leaving unresolved tension suspended between two people. This withdrawal is rarely about indifference, more often about overload, when emotional capacity collapses under perceived relational threat. Emotionally immature responses are frequently misread as intentional harm, yet their structure resembles reflex more than strategy. F. Skinner noted that behaviors reinforced by relief tend to repeat, even when long-term consequences worsen. If shutting down once prevented punishment, abandonment, or humiliation, the brain catalogs it as effective regardless of future relational costs. In public settings, these patterns remain hidden until pressure rises, then they surface abruptly, confusing those who expect adult regulation. A small disagreement escalates quickly, voices rise, logic fades, the moment becomes about survival rather than resolution. The individual may later struggle to explain their reaction, sensing damage but lacking access to the original trigger. This gap between action and awareness creates the illusion of carelessness, though it often reflects disconnection from internal emotional signals. Most people first recognize these patterns in others, colleagues, relatives, partners, rarely suspecting similar mechanisms quietly operate within themselves. Recognition becomes uncomfortable when familiar reactions appear mirrored back through someone else's behavior. What appears immature is often a frozen developmental strategy, preserved because it once worked too well. The deeper origin of this preservation does not begin in adulthood, and its roots reach further back than memory suggests. Long before adulthood, the brain learns which emotional responses preserve safety, attachment, or control within unstable or unpredictable environments. During early development, regulation is borrowed from caregivers. When that borrowing fails, the nervous system improvises alternatives. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described how humans adapt internally when external conditions feel uncontrollable, often sacrificing flexibility for certainty. A child learns quickly which emotions invite connection and which invite punishment, neglect, or withdrawal. Anger may summon attention where vulnerability disappears unnoticed, so anger becomes the chosen signal. Silence may reduce conflict in volatile homes, so emotional absence becomes a reliable refuge. One scene appears quietly, a child spills something accidentally, a caregiver explodes, the child freezes, breath shallow, learning speed over understanding. The lesson is not about messes, but about danger, unpredictability, and how quickly safety can vanish. Neuroscience shows that repeated emotional shocks wire faster pathways, prioritizing immediate protection over long-term relational learning. When fear arrives early and often, the brain optimizes for avoidance rather than repair. Another memory forms in school. Laughter erupts after a mistake. Heat floods the body. Humiliation burns. Defiance becomes armor. From that moment, correction equals threat, and defensiveness feels like dignity restored. Evolutionary psychology suggests young humans evolved to mirror dominant emotional patterns around them to maintain group belonging. If caregivers lack emotional regulation, children absorb dysregulation as normal relational currency. Emotional immaturity is rarely taught explicitly. It is absorbed implicitly through atmosphere, tone, and consequence. A household where feelings are mocked trains emotional concealment, not expression. A household where emotions control outcomes trains emotional escalation, not moderation. One evening unfolds. A parent withdraws affection after disagreement. Silence stretches for days. The child learns connection is conditional. Later, distance becomes a familiar language, easier than risking abandonment through openness. The developing brain records not narratives, but outcomes. What reaction ended discomfort fastest? Over time, these reactions become compressed into reflexes, executed before conscious thought intervenes. Carl Jung observed that what is not integrated in childhood returns later as fate, appearing uninvited and misunderstood. Social learning compounds this effect. Peers reward dramatic reactions, punish sensitivity, reinforcing protective exaggeration. A teenager learns that humor deflects vulnerability, sarcasm earns approval, sincerity invites exposure. Thus, emotional shortcuts solidify, valued for speed, not accuracy. Fear is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, living beneath composure, steering behavior invisibly. In adulthood, the original thread is gone, yet the nervous system still scans for echoes. Stress activates stored templates. Old responses reappear dressed in adult language and logic. A colleague's tone resembles a parent's criticism. The body reacts before context is processed. The reaction feels justified, even righteous, because it carries historical emotional weight. These patterns persist because they once preserved belonging, dignity, or physical safety. They are not signs of arrested intelligence, but of early adaptation under constraint. The tragedy is not that the brain learned these patterns, but that it never learned alternatives. As these early strategies mature alongside adult responsibilities, they begin to surface socially in ways others cannot trace back to their origin. By adulthood, these internal strategies no longer hide quietly. They express themselves through everyday interactions where emotional stakes feel unexpectedly high. Most people first notice the pattern externally, in others, long before recognizing its structure within familiar relationships. A friend cancels plans suddenly, irritation erupts, accusations follow, the underlying fear of rejection remains unspoken. The intensity seems unnecessary, yet it protects against an older wound being reopened. In romantic relationships, minor misunderstandings escalate quickly, not because of the present issue, but because attachment feels threatened. One partner asks for reassurance, the other hears demand. Autonomy feels endangered, withdrawal follows. Silence fills the room, not as punishment, but as self-preservation disguised as indifference. Family settings amplify these reactions. History saturates every exchange. Emotional memory overrides current reality. A simple suggestion at a gathering triggers defensiveness. Tone sharpens. Old roles instantly reassemble. Someone becomes the critic, another the child, another the mediator, despite years of independence elsewhere. In workplaces, emotionally immature patterns often masquerade as professionalism or authority. A supervisor dismisses feedback, reframes criticism as disrespect, power shields vulnerability from exposure. Meetings derail when egos collide. Emotional regulation collapses beneath titles and formal language. Observers interpret these moments as arrogance or incompetence, rarely sensing the underlying emotional fragility driving them. A brief scene unfolds in public. A stranger's comment sparks outrage. Voices rise. Dignity feels under attack. The reaction draws attention, temporarily restoring a sense of control through dominance. Social media intensifies this visibility. Emotional outbursts gain validation through likes. Outrage feels socially rewarded. Posts are written quickly, impulsively, then defended aggressively when challenged. Behind the screen, emotional distance reduces accountability, allowing immature patterns to operate unchecked. Friendships strain when accountability triggers defensiveness. Apologies feel like surrender. Repair feels unsafe. Small conflicts linger unresolved, accumulating quiet resentment beneath polite interaction. Over time, others adapt, walking carefully, avoiding topics, managing moods to maintain harmony. This accommodation unintentionally reinforces the behavior, teaching that escalation secures control. Behavioral science shows that environments adjust around the loudest emotional signals. The cost is subtle, relationships lose depth, honesty thins, emotional intimacy becomes conditional. A colleague stops offering ideas, a partner stops sharing concerns, a friend limits vulnerability. These losses rarely provoke confrontation. They occur gradually, almost invisibly. What appears socially as dominance, independence, or strength often masks fear of emotional exposure. Some people will recognize these dynamics immediately, not because they are rare, but because they feel familiar. Modern environments magnify these patterns, rewarding speed, reaction, and emotional intensity over reflection. As society accelerates, the space for emotional integration quietly shrinks, leaving these survival strategies increasingly unchecked. Modern life did not create emotionally immature patterns. It quietly provided environments where they thrive, accelerate, and become socially invisible through constant stimulation. Technology compresses emotional time. Reactions happen instantly. Reflection feels inefficient, and restraint appears outdated within fast-moving digital spaces. A message arrives without tone. Ambiguity triggers threat. The body responds before meaning is clarified. Defensive replies feel urgent and justified. Notifications reward immediacy, not accuracy. Emotional speed becomes currency rather than emotional depth. Social platforms amplify extremes. Measured responses disappear quietly, while dramatic reactions rise algorithmically to the surface. A post receives attention only after outrage appears, reinforcing emotional escalation as effective communication. The nervous system learns quickly. Intensity equals visibility. Calm equals irrelevance. Cultural narratives subtly praise authenticity without distinguishing between expression and regulation. Emotional discharge is reframed as honesty. Restraint misread as repression. Confusion replaces discernment. A workplace values constant availability. Boundaries blur. Emotional exhaustion accumulates unnoticed beneath productivity metrics. Stress responses activate repeatedly without recovery, reducing capacity for emotional nuance. In such environments, immature reactions feel necessary to maintain presence, power, or recognition. A brief scene unfolds during a virtual meeting. Interruption sparks irritation. Cameras hide discomfort. Voices sharpen to reclaim authority. The digital barrier removes corrective feedback. Escalation carries fewer immediate consequences. Economic pressure compounds this effect. Survival feels competitive. Vulnerability appears risky. When security feels fragile, emotional armor thickens. Responsiveness replaces reflection. Evolutionary psychologists suggest scarcity heightens defensive behavior. Modern scarcity often feels psychological rather than material. Time scarcity, attention scarcity, validation scarcity quietly activate threat responses. Cultural messaging rewards self-certainty. Ambiguity feels weak. Emotional certainty feels safe even when inaccurate. Public discourse models polarization. Compromise appears as loss rather than collaboration. Children and adolescents absorb these norms early, emotional extremity becomes normal communication. A young person learns that volume secures influence, calm disappears unnoticed. Entertainment mirrors this pattern. Conflict accelerates narratives, subtlety struggles to hold attention. Repeated exposure conditions viewers to expect emotional spikes. Tolerance for emotional complexity diminishes. Relationships exist within this climate. Repair requires slowness, but slowness feels inaccessible. A couple argues through text, misinterpretation multiplies, resolution stalls, emotional distance grows unnoticed. The medium shapes the message. Emotional immaturity finds ideal conditions within fragmented communication. Even self-awareness becomes performative, insight shared publicly without integration. Psychologist Carl Jung warned that consciousness without integration inflates the ego rather than transforming it. Modern culture celebrates insight, not embodiment. Recognition without change feels sufficient. This creates a strange tension. People know more about emotions than ever, yet tolerate them less skillfully. The cost appears quietly: chronic relational instability, emotional fatigue, shallow connection masked by constant interaction. People describe loneliness despite constant contact, exhaustion despite efficiency. The nervous system rarely returns to baseline. Emotional thresholds lower gradually. Immature reactions surface faster, persist longer, feel harder to interrupt. What once protected the self now begins eroding trust, safety, and relational continuity. Yet the system rewards the behavior externally. Attention, dominance, visibility arrive briefly. Internally, something contracts, emotional range narrows, recovery slows. This cost remains largely unspoken, hidden beneath cultural momentum and personal justification. Most will not name this loss directly. They will simply feel less connected, less patient, less present. Awareness of this amplification does not dissolve it, but it reveals how deeply the environment participates. Understanding this context unsettles the narrative of individual fault and exposes a broader psychological landscape. Beyond culture and technology, a quieter reckoning waits, one that surfaces only when attention turns inward. Awareness begins not as clarity, but as discomfort, a subtle recognition that something familiar no longer feels entirely external. The mind resists this recognition gently, preferring distance, preferring explanation without implication. Psychological insight often arrives as observation first, not transformation, watching patterns without interrupting them. A quiet moment unfolds after an argument, silence settles, justification fades, a residue of unease remains unexplained. The body remembers tension even when the mind supplies reasons. This unease signals proximity to something unintegrated, something still operating beyond conscious permission. Carl Jung observed that awareness alone does not liberate. It merely illuminates what was previously hidden. Illumination brings responsibility without instruction, clarity without comfort. Emotionally immature patterns persist partly because they dissolve quickly from awareness once the threat passes. Relief replaces reflection, normalcy resumes, the cycle remains intact. A person replays a conversation privately, noticing reactions that felt automatic, noticing how quickly certainty replaced curiosity. The recognition feels fleeting, easily overridden by distraction or external validation. Another scene appears. Laughter fills a room after tension passes. Unresolved emotions sink quietly beneath social normalcy. No one names what happened. Harmony returns, yet something remains subtly altered. Awareness exposes these small ruptures, moments where emotional truth was deferred rather than addressed. The discomfort lies not in blame, but in seeing how often these moments occur unnoticed. Behavior once perceived as necessary protection begins to look repetitive, predictable, almost scripted. Scripts feel safe because they remove uncertainty, even when they limit growth. A reflective pause emerges while watching someone else react strongly. Recognition flickers, then retreats. Similarity feels threatening because it collapses the observer position. The hidden self resists exposure, not because it is malicious, but because it equates exposure with danger. Viktor Frankl described the space between stimulus and response, yet awareness does not automatically expand that space. Sometimes awareness simply reveals how narrow the space has become. This narrowing produces a particular tension, knowing more without acting differently. Insight without resolution can feel heavier than ignorance. A micro moment appears in public, irritation rises, restraint follows, internal justification rushes to restore comfort. The reaction is contained externally, yet the internal pattern remains untouched. Emotional maturity is often imagined as visible calm, yet internally the same storms may persist quietly. Awareness removes the excuse of unconsciousness, but offers no immediate alternative. This creates a subtle grief, mourning the simplicity of unexamined reactions. Some begin to sense how identity has been built around these patterns. Reactions feel familiar, almost personal. Letting them go feels like erasure. The hidden self clings to what once ensured survival, even when survival is no longer at stake. Modern narratives promise resolution, closure, improvement, yet psychological reality often withholds neat endings. Awareness does not conclude the story, it destabilizes it. A person notices how often control replaces connection, how safety overrides intimacy. The recognition does not demand change, it simply refuses to disappear entirely. Emotionally immature patterns become harder to unsee once named internally. This seeing alters perception permanently, even when behavior remains unchanged. Conversations feel layered now, words carry subtext, reactions feel historically weighted. The world appears filled with people protecting something fragile, including oneself. Judgment softens, yet discomfort deepens. Compassion coexists with unease. There is no instruction here, no correction offered, only exposure. Exposure removes certainty, replacing it with ongoing observation. The hidden self does not retreat quietly when seen, it waits. It waits in moments of stress, fatigue, perceived threat. Awareness watches these moments approach without intervening. The tension lies in knowing what is happening while it happens. This tension does not resolve, it lingers as a quiet companion. Perhaps this is where the real damage begins to feel closer, less abstract, not in others alone, but in the unseen continuity between past protection and present consequence. This realization does not conclude the narrative. It simply leaves it open, unresolved, quietly echoing beyond the frame.